In the U.S. at this hour to the explosive crash of a small plane just after takeoff in Pennsylvania.
We begin with the breaking news out of Toronto, where a Delta Airlines flight arriving from Minneapolis has crashed on landing.
New tonight, the remains from all 67 victims of the mid-air collision over Washington, D.C. have been recovered.
This was the terrifying sight in the sky over Newark, New Jersey this morning.
Oh my God!
In Lancaster, Pennsylvania, just feet away from a senior living facility.
Heard the boom and smoke.
You can see the flames and smoke shooting out of the engine as the plane
After the
returned
deadliest
to
In the U.S. at this hour the explosive crash of a small.
If you've been paying attention to the news lately, you might have noticed a disturbing trend, a sharp increase in aviation disasters. It's been a turbulent few months, and every time we think things are settling down, another headline pops up about yet another plane going down or suffering a catastrophic failure. So, what exactly is going on? Is this just an unfortunate series of isolated incidents, or are we looking at a broader issue in aviation safety? As always, the truth lies in the details, and trust me, those details are as chilling as they are fascinating.
Filming the final anxious moments before the plane crashed, this passenger is heard praying. God is great, he says. As oxygen masks fall and panic grips the cabin, a flight attendant urges passengers to stay calm and keep their seatbelts fastened. And the man who captured this footage was among 29 survivors, walking from the wreckage at the crash site in Kazakhstan.
It all began in the final days of 2024 when Azerbaijan Airlines Flight 8243 suffered a catastrophic failure while attempting an emergency landing at Aktau in Kazakhstan. This happened on December 25th, a date that, for many, is associated with joy and celebration. But for the passengers and crew on board, it became the most terrifying night of their lives. At first, it seemed like bad weather was to blame. The pilots had already been struggling with poor visibility, strong winds, and a complete loss of GPS navigation, something that is becoming increasingly common due to jamming and spoofing tactics, particularly in conflict zones. They had originally been en route to Grozny, Russia, but after 2 failed landing attempts, they were left scrambling for alternatives. Then, things took a terrifying turn. Just as they were evaluating their next move, the cockpit voice recorder picked up something described in the preliminary report as a sonic boom. What followed was a rapid and complete systems failure. First, one, then all 3 hydraulic systems lost pressure, rendering the plane's primary control surfaces useless. The pilots could no longer maneuver the aircraft the way they normally would. And if that wasn't bad enough, the cabin also depressurized, meaning that the passengers were suddenly gasping for air at 30,000 feet. In the chaos, the crew couldn't determine what had hit them. The cabin crew reported 2 seats had exploded, an eerie detail that immediately raised suspicions of external interference. Could it have been a missile strike? The timing was certainly suspicious, given that the region was on high alert for Ukrainian drones. Desperate to land, the pilots asked for permission to divert to multiple airports in Russia, but poor weather made those options impossible. Eventually, they turned toward Aktau, Kazakhstan, using the only control method left at their disposal: differential thrust, adjusting engine power to steer the plane. This is a last resort technique and something no pilot ever wants to rely on. After nearly 75 minutes of fighting to keep the crippled aircraft in the sky, they crash-landed about 5 kilometers short of the runway. The toll was devastating. Of the 67 people on board, 38 lost their lives, including both pilots. Given the extensive damage to the aircraft, likely from missile fragments, it's a miracle anyone survived at all. This incident alone was shocking, but unfortunately, it was just the beginning of a series of high-profile aviation disasters.
Well, I wouldn't fly a Russian or any type of aircraft into Russia that borders Ukraine right now. Again, Russia has a history of this. We know that Russian air defense systems shot down a Malaysian flight over Ukraine in 2014. So again, it's very opaque as to what's going on inside of Russia.
Only 3 days later, on December 28th, another terrifying incident occurred. A PAL Airlines de Havilland Dash 8, operating as Air Canada Flight 2259, suffered a gear collapse while landing in Halifax, Canada. Unlike the Azerbaijan Airlines crash, this one didn't result in fatalities, but it was still dramatic. As the plane touched down, the left engine and wing scraped violently along the runway, sending sparks and flames shooting into the night sky. The cause? A blown tire on departure that no one noticed. The resulting imbalance caused vibrations that eventually unlocked the gear leg upon landing, leading to the collapse. Miraculously, all 77 people on board escaped without injuries. But the timing of this incident, coming on the heels of the Azerbaijan Airlines disaster, only added to the growing anxiety surrounding aviation safety.
The plane was carrying 4 crew and 76 passengers, among them 22 Canadians. The other passengers were multinational. Airport emergency workers mounted a textbook response, reaching the site within minutes and quickly evacuating the passengers.
Then came the real nightmare. The Jeju Air disaster, a horror in South Korea. On December 29th, Jeju Air Flight 2216 suffered an unthinkable accident. The aircraft, a Boeing 737, attempted to land at Muon Airport in South Korea, but did so with its landing gear completely retracted. The plane slammed into the runway at high speed, skidded out of control, and crashed into a concrete embankment. The result was catastrophic. The plane exploded upon impact, killing 179 people on board. Everyone except for 2 flight attendants in the rear of the aircraft, who somehow survived the inferno. To make matters even more confusing, investigators found that the pilots had made no distress calls before the crash. Did they even realize their landing gear wasn't deployed? Were they suffering from some kind of system failure that prevented them from lowering it? Or, more disturbingly, did something prevent them from communicating with air traffic control? We won't know for sure until the final investigation is released. But this crash, more than any of the others, shook the aviation world to its core.
Coming hours and in days, in fact. But the South Korean government says that they are going to look to see what exactly caused this accident to happen.
The magnitude of the tragedy raised unsettling questions that left experts and the public alike on edge. How could something like this happen, especially when the safety protocols in place were considered some of the best in the world? The unexpected and tragic loss of life was felt deeply, but it also prompted a deeper examination into the current state of the aviation industry. In the aftermath of this event, there was an overwhelming sense of urgency, as the scale of the disaster suggested that we were facing a broader problem. This wasn't just another isolated accident, it was part of a troubling pattern. The aviation world, which had always prided itself on its remarkable safety record, was now forced to confront the very real possibility that something much more systemic could be at play. How could such failures be happening with increasing frequency? Could it be that a perfect storm of issues, both old and new, were converging to bring about these catastrophic events? The anxiety surrounding these questions only intensified when other significant incidents followed in quick succession. Each new tragedy seemed to deepen the mystery of what was really happening behind the scenes. Was this a string of isolated, unrelated failures, or was there something larger at play that no one could yet fully comprehend? These were questions that many in the industry were grappling with, and it became clear that the aviation world, in the wake of this particular crash, was teetering on the brink of something far more complex and potentially catastrophic. More disasters, more questions. The tragedies didn't stop there. On January 28th, Airbus on Flight 391 caught fire while still on the ground. The blaze, which started in the rear of the passenger cabin, was intense enough that airport firefighters struggled to contain it. By the time the flames were extinguished, more than an hour later, the entire aircraft was a charred wreck. The fact that this happened on the ground, with passengers still inside the aircraft, only heightened the sense of horror. What if the fire had started in midair? What if it had occurred just moments after takeoff, leaving no time for passengers to escape? Thankfully, everyone managed to evacuate before the worst of the fire took hold, though 4 passengers sustained injuries during the emergency exit. The investigation into the fire pointed to the possibility of a lithium battery fire, a concern that had been increasingly flagged as a potential hazard in recent years. Air Busan, in response, banned power banks from being placed in overhead bins, strongly suggesting that a lithium battery fire was the likely culprit. The decision to implement this policy was a grim reminder of how dangerous seemingly innocuous items could become in certain circumstances. But was this truly the root cause? Or were there other factors at play that hadn't yet been uncovered? The ambiguity surrounding the fire left many wondering if we were just beginning to scratch the surface of a far deeper and more complicated issue. And if all of this wasn't enough, the worst aviation disaster in over a decade for the United States followed the very next day.
We now have an FAA report that a military helicopter and a regional jet have collided.
On January 29th, American Airlines Flight 5342, a PSA Airlines CRJ 700, experienced a mysterious loss of control while on approach to Washington National Airport, which eventually they released that a military Black Hawk bird hit the plane head on midair. What exactly went wrong is still unclear, but preliminary reports indicate that electrical malfunctions played a role. The plane was attempting an ILS approach when all hell broke loose. In the case of Flight 5342, the sudden loss of control during a critical phase of flight raised even more troubling questions. Electrical malfunctions are not unheard of, but to have such a failure during an ILS, Instrument Landing System approach, a procedure that is typically used when visibility is poor, was particularly concerning. The aircraft had been in relatively routine conditions, which made the sudden onset of problems even harder to explain. The authorities were still sifting through the wreckage of the situation, trying to piece together the puzzle and understand how this failure could have gone unnoticed or unresolved by the crew. Was this a technical glitch? A hardware failure? Or perhaps a combination of factors that no one had anticipated? Like many accidents before it, the investigation would take time, but the very fact that it followed so closely after other incidents added fuel to the fire of growing concern. What was truly happening? Was the aviation industry, long regarded as one of the safest modes of transportation, slipping into dangerous territory? The upcoming months will be crucial as investigators work to determine what's causing these incidents and how to prevent further tragedies. Let us know your thoughts on this in the comments. Which of these was the most unexplainable incident?